What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. Now, it's been almost a week since we had the announcement or the reveal of Worldslayer, and since then a lot of the information has been made available by content creators that have been able to play certain parts of the game already, and at the very least dive into some of the systems and some of the upgrades and some of the things. Now, specifically one system that I'd like to dive into and actually do 4 different videos on, one for each one of the classes, is the Pax system. So if we go over to what this is, basically as an additional way of leveling up and customizing your character, we still have the old school talent trees of course, but now we will have this Pax talent tree as well, which will actually give you up to 5 points depending on how far you've gotten in the campaign of Worldslayer, and then in the end leave you with these 5 customizable points that you can essentially move around within this pool. And so the thing is, I think the most important thing we have to mention here is that the maximum amount of Pax points that you're ever going to have to work with is 5. And the tree is generally divided into 2 areas. And in the case of the Devastator, which is the focus for us on the first video of these 4 that I was talking about, is that we have the Wrecker tree at the top, which is kind of like your firepower build tree. And then we have the Tectonic shifted tree in the bottom, which is kind of like your anomaly tree. Now, while I'm sure you could potentially, put 2 or 3 points into the one tree and 2 points into the other tree, at least without testing it, it doesn't seem like that would be the smartest decision to do, because of course what you want to be doing is you want to be getting to these back points, the capstones, the final points in each one of these streams, so that you can actually get the full benefit of what that sort of line, what that build allows for, as some of these or rather not pack, but some of these capstones actually seem to be super powerful. So what I'd like us to do today is just go through what all of these do, and then also just from my side, we've got a heck of a lot of time left before the game actually comes out, about 2 months from now. And so there's a good amount of time that we can theory craft, and we can see if we can predict some crazy builds that'll probably be coming out and that will be available to us at Worldslayer, and also maybe we can kind of identify some things which will not be that great. So starting off, what I did is, of course, on the screen right now is what it looks like in the game, but because I don't have access to the game and because I can't freely move around in it, what I actually did is I compiled all the information together and I made something like this. So this is just me in Excel, the same thing. We're taking the top tree, the first tree, Wrecker, and I'm essentially just plotting out all of these points. So as you can see here on my screen right now, I've tried to sort of represent naturally how it looks, right? So you have in the first point, you have 1 choice. In point number 2, you have 2 choices. Point 3, you have 1 choice. And then you sort of divide into either the upper, the middle, or the bottom of each section. I'd like us just to discuss each one of these points and potentially identify some really sexy sort of build options already, some good options here. But let's go ahead and start right out with hunting season. Now, as I mentioned, we're looking at Wrecker, and Wrecker is a firepower side, so it's the gun side of Devastator. So hunting season says that it increases your weapon damage by 15% and your magazine size by 50. So that's just a good all-round nice little combined flat buff there, and the little bit of additional weapon damage you get there is good, but the 50% additional magazine size is fantastic. It definitely increases the amount of bullets you, for instance, carry in with like a shotgun or something like that, because as we know, the Devastator kind of like focuses around close range engagement. So while you can absolutely take an LMG or something like that and stand on the outside and sort of shoot in, the whole skill set of the Devastator, and of course how everything comes together, is kind of like focused into being in the mix, being in close range. So again, hunting season is just an all-around pretty good one, and you have to pick that one up, regardless. Then when we get to the second line here, of course, here we have 2 potential choices. So at the top we have Harvester, which increases your weapon leech by 10% and additionally increases your weapon leech by 2% for every enemy in close range up to 10. So you can get quite a bit of additional weapon leech here if you're, again, like I said, in the mix here. And this is obviously a great mechanic for you to essentially, keep yourself alive. The other side, instead of taking Harvester, we can take Hardened. Now Hardened increases your damage mitigation by 5% and additionally increases damage mitigation by 2% for every enemy in close range. So you kind of have like 2 options here in terms of survivability, and one would be weapon leech and one would be damage mitigation. For me, I think I like the idea of damage mitigation more than weapon leech, because weapon leech you still have to be shooting a weapon and hitting things to actually be getting that effect, where damage mitigation is just there. But I think this kind of comes down to, again, to play style and exactly how you would play, and in the end we'd have to test it to see which one of these two is actually more efficient, better than the other one. But I think that, you know, we might be sweating the details too much with that in any case. Now the third one here, this is like the bomb diggity. This is what Devastator players have been asking for the entire time. So or rather firepower Devastators have been asking for since the dawn of time, is a way for them to essentially reload weapons, aka to have a firepower skill, you know. So while we don't have that, still we don't have an actual skill that allows you to proc this like we have twisted rounds with the trickster, or, you know, something like that. The point is, finishing touch says that it increases your weapon damage by the percentage of ammo missing from your magazine, and killing shots replenish 30% of your magazine. So if you're gonna go firepower Devastator, then this is of course a no-brainer, and of course you have to take it to proceed deeper into the tree. But this is just fantastic, and this, you know, finally gets Devastators to the point where they also have a much more reliable way. Sure, there were ways that you could do it with maybe mods and stuff like that before, but this is by far a much more reliable way for you to actually do this. And again, kind of feeding into the whole shotgun sort of meta or mechanic around Devastators, this is just perfect. The fact that it also increases your weapon damage by a percentage of ammo missing from your magazine is really good, because it has this nice ramp up mechanic. So if you like sort of threading the needle between always running at almost 50 to 60% of your mag being full, then you kind of have that 40% of the empty mag sitting there, and that's essentially, you know, topping you up the whole time. So that's pretty cool. I really like this. I think finishing touch is fantastic, and it's a step in the right direction for Devastators to start seeing some build diversity. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take them top, middle, and bottom in that order. So of course in top we have armor division. Now this says increases your armor piercing by 10% and reduces your kinetic skills cooldown by 50%. And I really like these tooltips because the assumption is not just that everybody knows what a kinetic skill and what a seismic skill is, and that they actually show you the affected skills there. It's really cool. It helps out newcomers to the game. I really like the fact that it's so clean and concise and actually shows all the skills, so that's really cool. But getting back to what this says, armor division increases your armor piercing by 10% and reduces your kinetic skills cooldown by 50% of your armor piercing. This is really cool, especially if you start diving deep into stacking armor piercing, because you can actually reduce the cooldowns quite massively. And of course the skills that are affected here are skills that potentially sometimes start out with fairly large cooldowns, and so getting them crushed down by this so you can, you know, basically leap as much as you want is pretty awesome. And as far as you can stack it down, of course, we're going to have to see that with testing. There's a lot of the things that I can't make predictions on right now, because it could be that maybe they change some of the mods that are in the game right now to have higher or lower values. Maybe those scale differently now. There's a lot of things that could still change. But on paper, at least, this looks like you could do some funky stuff with basically stacking armor piercing here and having extremely low cooldowns for these affected skills. Then the last one, and this is the capstone of the top, is against devastating odds, and this says damaging at least 3 enemies with a kinetic skill grants you 30% armor piercing, which again feeds back into armor division, so cool. And then damaging less enemies makes your shot critical shots for 4 seconds. So it's kind of like an and or situation here. It'll be interesting to see how it works, and if these I don't know if these effects would maybe cancel each other out, so you could only have one of them on it on. So either you have the one on the other, or is there a way for you to actually have both effects on at the same time, which is really sexy. But again, this is just if you are playing into a build that you know, at least focuses around 2 of these abilities, or maybe even for that matter just heavily focuses into leap and using things like despair. And so then this is obviously kind of like the route that you want to go if you're going to be dabbling in firepower with that build, because this is just going to make your leaps be, you know, almost instantaneous. You're going to get the additional despair, that's the additional damage that comes from that. So yeah, just really, you know, interesting. And I think this is a solid-ish tree. I have to say though that right off the bat, before we even get to the anomaly side of Devastator, When it comes to Outriders, and this is just a general caveat, as a whole, I prefer anomaly builds to bullet builds. I always have. My first character that I, built out really well and got really far within the game and was able to farm the most with was firepower character, but a technomancer. But I prefer the anomaly playstyle, and it's been like that for a while. So while this is impressive, again, I don't imagine this is the first route that I'm going to go, but I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of players that play Devastator and have been complaining about build diversity, and this is phenomenal. So we go middle tree then. So middle tree gives us elitism, which says shots on elites reduce incoming damage from elites by 15% and increases your damage against them by 15% for 5 seconds, and it has a 5 seconds cooldown. So this is kind of a little bit, I mean, it's far more generic than some of the other effects we're looking. So this is just a flat 15%, kind of like damage reduction from elites. And this makes you deal 15% more damage against elites. And it's essentially an effect that you can sort of refresh every 5 seconds. Now, I have to say that at least with the Devastator is known as to be the hardiest character of the four classes. And so Devastator is usually the one that's running around and picking other characters up when everybody's down and dying and everything like that. So it's interesting that they would make such a kind of like a vanilla-ish bland situation, because if you build a Devastator right, and I would say if you play a Devastator at a certain skill level, then elites wouldn't really ever be a problem for you in the first place. But of course, we don't know what the difficulty spikes are going to be like in the new game modes that are coming, and especially the new end game. And so it can be a case of that where we used to think that Devastators were the king of survivability and that they could take so much damage. That might not actually be the case anymore. So then the capstone for the middle one is come one, come all. And this says your kinetic skills remove effect resistance from hit elites. And this is 10 seconds cooldown. I'm not entirely sure what this means. Your kinetic skills remove effect resistance. I assume it just strips resistances off of the enemies. I could be imagining that this is something really, really complicated, but it's actually not. But in any case, this means that those skills, those kinetic skills, will actually then do this effect resistance stripping, and this can, but from hit elites. So it doesn't do it to anything except elites, but obviously that means bosses as well, I would imagine, in this terminology. Plus it also has a 10 seconds cooldown, which is kind of like a lot. Like 10 seconds is kind of like a lot, unless you can get those elites, those champions, to all be sort of bunched up together. Then you might have a situation where, because remember, you're going to be leaping in onto the first one, that's going to proc the effect on that. But whatever sort of a captain or elite or something like that that's outside of this effect is not going to be giving you this benefit. So you're going to have to leap onto them again as well, or use one of the other skills of your kinetic skills, and that could potentially, of course, be within the 10 seconds cooldown, so it doesn't proc. Any case, so far for me, the top is, I would say, a lot more impressive than the middle one. And then last but not least, we have the bottom tree, and this is Strange Surgeon. So this says your shots inflict bleed. I really, really like this. So it says killing an enemy afflicted by bleed in close range reduces ongoing cooldowns of protection skills by 1 second. So that's, of course, Reflect Bullets and Golem. And this is really cool though, because first of all, your shots inflict bleed is really good. That means that there's a whole bunch of damage effects in the game that you can stack onto this. The ones that say deal additional damage to enemies that are bleeding. So this is almost like the kind of like way that you would build something like a Technomancer, where you would make additional damage to Frozen and additional damage to Toxic and all of that. So that's really cool. But the second effect is also pretty sweet here, because killing an enemy afflicted by bleed, so anything that you're shooting in close range, when they're close up to you and you're using a shotgun, for example, reduces ongoing cooldown of protection skills by 1. Now, of course, there are effects and things in the game that you can essentially make yourself deal more damage when you have Golem on, or if Reflex Bullets, and this basically makes those skills come on off cooldown quicker. And there's also other mods which also reduce their cooldown. So this will just in general mean that you could always have this protection skill up, and when you have this protection skill up, you have a lot more survivability, because that's what that skill does. And in some cases you can have, like for instance Golem, you can actually share that effect with, you can have a mod that shares some of that effect, a mini Golem, whatever you want to call it, with your allies, which is Sweet. And this is really cool. And then at the same time, because you are constantly killing stuff that is bleeding in close range, you have this on demand the entire time. So I really like this. Strange Surgeon is pretty sweet. And then last but not least, the capstone for the bottom one is Overwhelming Force. Now this is while a protection skill is active, so again, either Golem or Reflect Bullets, you release seismic impulses every 2 seconds that deal damage equal to 20% of your armor. Now, again, here there are ways for you to, you know, stack armor in this game, and of course there are mods that you can use for that. And so you could definitely get a huge amount of armor onto your character. So let's say, for argument's sake, right, that you could get, let's make it, and of course remember guys, we're going to be scaling a lot higher than gear level 50, so that's also going to mean our HP pools are going to be bigger, our armor is going to be bigger, everything, because everything will increase by a certain magnitude. But let's just, for the sake of, you know, ease of numbers, let's imagine that you stack your armor to 200k. That means that, you know, you will have, I mean, that's 40k, right? You will have that amount of damage pulsing out every 2 seconds. And that sounds cool. It's like a bunch of free damage, but it's unclear right now. Like, is it a radial in front of you? Is it like a circle around you? Does it hit everything in 20 yards? Does it hit everything on the screen? Can it be resisted? There's a bunch of things that we don't know about this, and I mean, when I look at it, it seems really like juicy. And I have to say, out of these three, I kind of feel like I would go bot. I would go Strange Surgeon and Overwhelming Force. That's the path I think I would take with bullets. And so that's definitely something that I would test. But again, like on paper, it seems like a bunch of free damage that you're getting the whole time, and you know, that counts, that sort of counts up over time. And yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see just how good this really is. I have a feeling like this is either gonna be like really sad vanilla, like boring, or it's gonna be OP as fuck. Right? I'm okay with no, I'm actually okay with the OP one. I'm not so okay with you know, like it being like a waste, because yeah, then it's like a really strong tree up until the point where we get to the capstone, and then it's just like so yeah. Any case, that's it for the firepower side. So let's go and scroll down now, and let's get to anomaly, which I'm far more interested in. So again, starting from the start, we have what sets the whole thing apart, or starts it off, is impact point. This says your seismic and kinetic skills, so essentially almost all of the skills, right? Damage is increased by an additional 50% of your anomaly power. Now, bonus damage is split among all damaged enemies. So again, let's just read that. Your seismic and kinetic skill damage is increased by an additional 50% of your anomaly power. Cool. This bonus damage is split among all damaged enemies. So if you are hitting one enemy, then you're going to deal a shitload of damage to them. If you're hitting like 8 enemies that are spread out in a group, then it's going to sort of like chip or deal a little bit of damage to each one of them. So this actually affects a shitload of skills, but more importantly, it affects Earthquake, which is cool. And this definitely seems like, so I'm going to think about, when we're talking about these builds and about these skills, I'm going to imagine in a way like the cookie cutter way that I have always played Seismic Commander. So Seismic Commander is of course one of the legendary sets for the Devastator in the game right now. Of course, there are new sets coming, but this is one of the ones we know. And Seismic Commander of course increases damage to things that are bleeding. And so it kind of favors things like Earthquake, and it favors things like Impale, basically everything that causes bleeding. So the way that I would generally play this is I would run, like, for instance, Earthquake and Impale. And this is just going to make those skills actually deal more damage. And Earthquake is, especially the way that you build Seismic Commanders, you get access to 3 Earthquakes. Sometimes 2, but definitely never less than 2. You kind of do 1, 2, 3 as, you know, juicy. And then you essentially just use them to hammer out like a whole bunch of damage on a group of enemies, especially if you make the radius of the Earthquake bigger. And so this just means that it's going to just push out a lot more damage. And I like it. I mean, we have to take it in any case, so it is what it is. Now, our first choice in level 2 comes with either taking Puncture or Obliteration. Now, Puncture, first of all, says your seismic skills inflict bleed. So that's, of course, Earthquake and you know, all of our seismic skills, you know, Impale. And so they are, for like, Earthquake by default does not inflict bleed, so you actually have to install a mod for that. So this kind of makes that mod redundant. So this basically, and this actually affects all of the other seismic skills as well. And then this says that anomaly damage to enemies afflicted by bleed is increased by 15%. So there's that soft damage increase already, which you can then further on stack with more of these mods, which additionally increase damage to bleed. So this is, again, even just out without looking at the second one, this is definitely the one I would take if I was playing that cookie cutter seismic commander setup what I was talking about before. Now, for the sake of completionless, or like looking at everything, the second point here is obliteration, and that says it increases your anomaly power and resistance piercing by 5%. Each damaged enemy increases this bonus by 5% up to an additional 15%, so you can get up to 20, right? And generally speaking, again, like I said, the earthquakes, you kind of drop them onto clusters of enemies, so I'm pretty sure you'll have the uptime on this almost at all times. And again, it increases your anomaly power, so if you hit like a bunch of enemies, you're going to get 20% additional anomaly power, and you're going to get 20% additional resistance piercing. I like that. That's actually pretty, it seems like it's fairly decent. It's got a lot going for it. The fact that you can ramp up to it, the fact that it doesn't have a cooldown period, and the fact that it affects these particular skills, which generally hit groups of enemies in any case. So I really do like that, but I still think puncture is better. So then when we get to the third one, again, one that we have to take is Earthen Shell. Now this is damage dealt with skills is converted to shield. Interesting, because again, this kind of goes back to my point that I made before about Devastators being generally the chunky, the difficult to kill class in the game. And so this is interesting to me because it is obviously, when we look at the firepower tree above, we have damage mitigation built into one of the choices, or we have weapon leech built into one of the choices, which gives you damage mitigation. And this, on the other hand, basically means that as you're killing stuff with earthquake, and as you're killing stuff and impaling it and everything like that, you are actually converting that damage into shield. Now, I think that's really cool, and I think if you take this, and again, we don't know what the damage spike levels are going to be like. So while we think, for instance, now that Devastator's nigh unkillable, and that is honestly how I feel about Devastators, that is not to say that that will always be the case. We also don't know what kind of damage types are coming, and something that Devastators, or I think most characters struggle with, is some characters are better at dealing with like spike damage than continuous damage. And I think Devastators in a way might have a problem with dealing with continuous damage, especially once their skills are on cooldown, or their protection skills are on cooldown, or they don't have any other way to gain life because maybe they're far away and they're not in close range, so they can't heal. So I welcome this because it does give you that additional survivability, and I think it feeds into the whole idea of what a Devastator is, and that is just this unstoppable fucking juggernaut that can survive almost everything. That's definitely what this works itself towards. So then again, top tree, middle tree, bottom tree. First one up top is upheaval. Now this says enemies damaged by seismic skills, that's by seismic skill, I guess it should have been skills, become upheaved for 5 seconds, storing 15% of damage received during that time and releasing it once the effect ends. I don't know what upheaved means, but I assume that there's a bunch of new statuses in the game, or status effects or something like that, and I guess, or upheaved might just be a Devastator thing. But what this means, or what this looks like to me, is it's kind of like just saying that enemies damaged by seismic, so you hit them with an earthquake, they become upheaved for 5 seconds, and 15% of the damage received during that time is stored in and then released once the effect ends, right? So after 5 seconds it kicks and it deals damage. Now again, at the level where we are right now with Devastators, most trash don't survive 1 or 2 like pulses of earthquake, as an example. Again, I'm focusing on earthquake a lot, but it's think about it the same, like if we were to say impale, maybe the same thing. But the point is, the only place where I think this plays in is if you actually are fighting an elite or a captain or something like that actually survives that rotation of earthquakes that you put down on top of them. And then my question, I guess, is that you can have a very inefficient situation here, where I think if you're playing solo, this is a lot better than like let's say, for instance, if you were playing in a group. If you're playing in a group, then you can't always guarantee that those 5 seconds are going to pass before the effect procs and you deal that damage. So enemies, those enemies can get shot and killed by other classes in that time, which means that damage that you've stored up goes to waste. And if it was a thing about trying to be as efficient as possible, then I kind of feel like you waste potential here by taking this. So I think Upheaval might be great if you're playing solo, but maybe not so good in groups. But again, this is pure speculation from my side. We need to play it, we need to test it. This is literally me just reading shit on a page and coming up with some stuff. So then the capstone for the top there is multi-strike. Now this is 30% of damage dealt by seismic skills is stored and added to your next seismic skill. The effect resets every time you release your stored damage. So again, I'm harping on earthquake the whole time, but let's go back to our earthquake example. So like I said, the real juice is if you have like access to 3 earthquakes. So this kind of means to me like you're gonna have one normal earthquake, one powerful earthquake, then one normal earthquake, and then you go on cooldown. Now this says the effect resets every time you release your stored damage. So I would assume that it doesn't specify that this kind of like wears off after a while. So I would imagine you go, I don't mean to call it weak, but you guys are going to get what I'm saying. You go one weak earthquake, one strong earthquake, one weak earthquake, one strong earthquake. So it's kind of like a good ramp up mechanic there again. But again, I just think like it really seems like this top tree is for solo. Because while, yeah, this additional damage that you get from multi-strike will still be good, there's going to be situations where you use your weak earthquake and then the enemies get burnt down, and so you don't use your second one, right? And then again, like I said, my assumption here is that buff lies there, and even if it has to lie there for 30 or 45 seconds while you transition through an area or something like that, when you get to the next place where you want to use an earthquake, that earthquake is then going to be powerful. But maybe that shit falls off. So this would need to be tested and everything like that. But really, yeah, again, it just kind of makes it seem to me like this would be like the solo where you play this, and when you want to use group play, maybe we pick one of the other twos. But let's see. So the middle one is Richter Rising, is our first one there, and then it says enemies damaged by both seismic and kinetic skills within 4 seconds receive 30% more damage for 4 seconds. Now that's more like it. To me, this is phenomenal because this opens it up to you. You aren't, sort of pushed into a corner where you only have to use seismic skills or you only have to use kinetic, but you literally can pick from essentially almost the entire roster of skills that are available to a Devastator, and you can make the build however you want to, and you're going to be able to tap into this additional damage that you can push onto enemies. So enemies damaged by both seismic and kinetic skills within 4 seconds receive 30%. So again, I just want to add on to what I'm saying here. You're actually going to have to use both kinetic and seismic, of course, in your build. So in that case, you can essentially, hit them with the 2 different abilities, and then you get that. So as an example, you could, what you could do is you could leap into a group of enemies, and then you could earthquake them. And as soon as you do that, now you've done both seismic and kinetic. So now the buff is available for 4 seconds, and then you go earthquake, and that's both going to benefit from this additional damage. So I like it. So far, I like this more than the top tree, and this definitely suits multiplayer. Then when we get to the capstone of the middle one, energy transmission, each enemy damaged by your kinetic skill increases the damage of your next seismic skill. So again, this sort of cycling mechanism. Then each enemy damaged by your seismic skill reduces ongoing cooldowns of your kinetic skills. So this is, again, like I really like this actually, because you get the additional damage, which is on the top one there. 10% seems to be a little bit low, not gonna lie. But what I like is how you can then affect the cooldowns of your kinetic skills, and for the Devastator, generally your kinetic skills are the ones that have the large cooldown pools. So this is really cool. So even without stacking cooldown reduction on every piece of gear, you actually have access to some CDR. There's some cooldown reduction there, and I actually like that. So far I think the middle tree is actually very sexy. So bottom tree then is terms of engagement is the first one at number 4. Now this says 50% of damage dealt by kinetic skills is stored and added to your next kinetic skill. This effect resets every time you release your stored damage. So kind of like the same thing that we saw at the top here with Upheaval. Now it's just kinetic instead of seismic. Much higher damage value though. So, or storage value though. So the top one is 15%, and that's of course because you can have multiples of them. If it was, the top one was also 50% and it was earthquakes that were affected, that would be ridiculous, right? So this is 50%, and of course it affects boulder dash, leap, and so the point is that this is 50% of damage dealt by kinetic. So especially if you're tapping into a build and you're using leap with despair to debuff enemies and deal more damage to them, then this is kind of like probably the way you're gonna have to go if you're going the anomaly route, because this 50% is a lot. And then the capstone of this momentum says each enemy damaged by your kinetic skills reduces ongoing cooldowns of other kinetic skills by 1 second. So again, just a way of feeding in CDR here. They want to, and I think this was something that I recall People Can Fly saying at some point, is that one of the things that's important to them is that people feel that they have access to their skills as much as possible, because that's the fun part of the game, according to them, is these big abilities that you can use on enemies. And so clearly the point is that, you know, things like you know, your kinetic skills on a Devastator are usually the ones that have, like I said before, big cooldowns. So anything that you can do to drop this down is good. I think I would have liked it if momentum had something more there still as well. I think this is kind of weak, the fact that it just, so it says each enemy damaged by a kinetic skill reduces ongoing cooldowns. Okay, I mean, I'm rereading it now, and so if you jump onto a group of 5 enemies, then that's 5 seconds off a cooldown. So that's pretty sweet. But I don't know, I can't help but think it would have been nice if there was like a small damage increase here still as well. I don't know. But for me, I think Richter Rising and energy transmission is maybe the way that I would go. Again, discussing this seismic commander sort of setup that I would go with. But yeah, this kind of seems, and again, looking at the two different ones, of course I am more excited for anomaly builds, but all in all of this is kind of impressive shit, and it's really cool how we're going to be able to test all of these things and come up with cool builds, and also see how the new gear and weapons and stuff in the game that come in, how they further bolster these. So super excited. And that was it. That was the run through of the Devastator Pax Trees. As I've mentioned, I'll be doing the same for the other 3 classes as well. Let me know in the comments down below if you enjoy this kind of content specifically for this. This is a lot longer than usual, the videos that I make. I think we're clocking in at 30 minutes already, so that's quite hectic. But thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. You guys know I love Outriders, and I could sit in theorycraft and talk shit about this game all day long. But I gotta go because you gotta go. So thank you so much. Again, it's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, a great afternoon, and a super awesome evening wherever you are in the world. Until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.